Welcome back to another amazing, and I can already say that in advance because I'm sure that it'll be amazing, live webinar with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. This is entitled The Stranger Amongst Us, and this is being sponsored by the Bring Them Home project, which is involved in education and informing Jews around the world that it's time to come home to their ancestral homeland. You can find more information about that on our website, which is itstimetolive.com or israeltorah.org. You can also find Rabbi Winston's shiurim, his lectures, his books, and everything that he's up to on his website, which is 36.org. Let me just find this. 36.org. I'm going to put that on the thing because it's spelled out. 36.org. And we're also happily co-sponsored by Israel 365 and Israel 365 News. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And without further ado, Rabbi Winston.
Thanks. How can I get a mug like that? Anyhow,
We'll arrange it.
These parshiot, as we've been pointing out since the beginning, I mean, through every single weekly, Torah reading is teaching us a lot about life and the whole concept of redemption. And we spoke about personal redemption, about fulfilling the mandate of an Adam, right? Aleph, Dalet, Mem. That's Adam in English, but Adam is Hebrew, which means man, and explained how that is indicative of where a person's holding spiritually, physically, and how that affects their own personal freedom, because a person can experience personal freedom even if the rest of the nation is not yet experiencing freedom, just like we see in the world. That some people live above what's going on, and some people are just mired in it, and they can't seem to get out of it. It's their whole reality. So, and we're all struggling with this, and ultimately we all want freedom, whether we think we do or we don't, but because peace of mind is where it's at, and peace of mind is freedom. I mean, the real peace of mind, the kind that comes from knowing that you've done what you have to do and you're fulfilling yourself, not the kind you sort of blank out and live with cognitive dissonance where you just ignore realities that are real and dangerous, but you pretend they don't exist. That's not true peace of mind. Peace of mind comes from living with truth and resolving it with yourself and being able to live from day to day knowing that you're on the right path to your own personal fulfillment, and ultimately, working with God towards the fulfillment of the mandate of creation. That's all these parshas. But certainly from Shmos onward, Be'era and Bo and Beshalach and all the way through. But this is such a main parsha. It's a major parsha. And because this is the parsha, this is the break from Egyptian slavery. This is the time we finally go out. Shmos is building towards it, and the Arab was already in the process with the plagues and all the development, and finally we break free in this week's parsha, not just into the desert, not just on our way to Mount Sinai, but into history. We're now a different nation. We began to develop as a people in Egypt. The first one to actually call us a nation was Pharaoh himself. He referred to us as a nation, and we came down as a family, 70 souls altogether. When make the calculation, and we grew quickly into a massive nation. By the time the eighth plague came around, there were 15 million Jews over the course of 209 years. It's quite an increasement, which is one of the reasons why the slavery began in the first place, because miraculously people were giving birth to a lot of people a lot of kids at one time, and the Egyptians got nervous about this, and that's what really triggered the whole new Pharaoh thing, which we spoke about before in Parsha Shmos. But this is where so much of what we have to know about for the rest of our lives. I mean, we sit down every year, not just Orthodox Jews, not just conservative Jews, not just Reform Jews, but all kinds of groups in between. The entire Jewish people, for the most part, it's probably the most commonly celebrated aspect of Judaism, I think even more than Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But people sit down to make a Seder of some sort. Whether they do it the traditional way or not, that remains to be seen. But it's a Seder. They're doing it on the night of Pesach. They're not doing it like some other time of the year. but they're doing it on the night of Pesach because there's some type of connection on some level that they have to the history of the Jewish people, even if they don't believe that it actually took place or took place the way it's described in the Chumash, because it's quite a story. It's quite miraculous, and it's not there's not tons of history books that talk about it. And it's a long time ago, but everybody somehow connects to it because this is what the Jewish people are all about. This is where we came from. This is our beginning. This is our history. This is the foundation of who we are as a nation. This is it's all built into this week's parsha. So of all the parshiyot, this is seminal. Parshas Yisro, of course, really is the completion of this, because the only reason why God took the Jewish people out of Egypt was not just to free us from slavery, but it was to bring us to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah so we could fix ourselves up, join with God in the perfection of creation, and, of course, be an Or LaGoyim, a light unto the nations. That's one of our main missions, our main tasks in this world and history. And given the direction of history and all the world wars and all the corruption and all the things that have not gone so well overall, doesn't look like we've done such a sterling job of that mission. But it, somewhat we did. We've had an impact on creation, on history, mankind, and but we still have a lot of work to do, and that's going to take care of itself, because we're not dealing with it on the level that we should. But that's what receiving Torah is all about. At least we received the Torah. At least we try to live by it with a base of Mikdash, and they're a core group of Jews today, this very day, thousands of years later, living by Torah, learning Torah, living by mitzvahs, and trying to be Kiddush Hashem, trying to be a sanctification of God's name. Those two parshas go together like bookends. So Bo begins the process, and the Parshas Yisro is really the end of that process, and then the rest of history is the living it out and trying to fulfill the mandate that God has for the Jewish people and for creation as a whole. So there's so much to learn in this parsha. We have Korban Pesach, right? The Pesach offering, the Passover offering, which was a far more dramatic thing back in the old days at the temple, when we actually brought a sacrifice. And we ate it, roasted it, and went through the whole process of going up to the temple and all the groups. And we had to share it with your family and friends if you had to. And it was a very, very dramatic event. Today, it's a lot of fun. You can make it more dramatic. In fact, the more you put into the Seder, the more you get out of it. And the Seder is hugely important. We'll come back to that, God willing, if we're still around, closer to Pesach. But, it's hugely important, not just because of the fact that it commemorates all of this, because it's a mistake to be a passive bystander going through all these parshiyot. You really have to put yourself into it. So that's what the Seder is for. That's what we have, the Seder for, is to allow us to try to transpose ourselves from our time back into that time, and to enter a whole different mindset and mentality and try to connect up, because it's not a game. It's not a just a thing we do for the fun of it, just to re-experience, a chavaya, I say in Hebrew, not just just a thing to do to try to experience something. It's much more than that. It's really going home in a lot of respects. It's like they're becoming more attached to our soul and finding yourself. It's all wrapped up in this week's parsha, and the Korban Pesach is essential. It's essential. Everything about it. Look at the details. I mean, every sacrifice had its own particular details. There's a sin offering, a transgression offering, and there's a free will offering, and there's what's called a shlamim. It's like a Thanksgiving offering to Hashem. There's all different sacrifices, and they all have their rules and details. But there's something very unique about the Korban Pesach that stands out specifically, not just because it's the first one we have to do, but every last aspect of it. You can't have it raw. Well, who wants to anyhow? But you just can't. You have to cook it, and it can't be boiled. It has to be roasted specifically in a specific way. It has to be roasted. You can't break the bones. And there's like all these details. You can't leave anything over. By chatzot, by midnight, it's got to be gone. You're not allowed to leave over any of the Korban Pesach, which means if you can't eat it all yourselves in time, a certain amount, minimum amount that you eat, then you have to bring other people into your group, and they have to do it as a group, and there are a lot of details. But each detail is another detail in understanding how to achieve freedom. Because as simple as it sounds, it's not. People have been struggling with the concept of freedom for a long time. There's different levels of freedom, obviously. It's just getting out. Like the bell goes at 3:15, and school's over for that day. You've been looking at the clock the entire time, and now you could actually go. And you burst through that door to go home and go play with your friends. Freedom! I was like, well, who says? It's freedom. It's a form of freedom. You don't have to be there anymore. But if a person understands what freedom is really about, freedom is not just not having to do something that you don't feel like doing. Freedom is to do what you want to do, which is to fulfill yourself. And a lot of times, just ask any athlete or businessman who wants to succeed how much they punish themselves and they suffer to be able to achieve their goal, but lovingly and willingly. And if you come along and say, hey, it's 6 o'clock, let's go for supper, take a break. Leave me alone. I want to be here right now for the next 3 hours working this proposal so I can get the job and get the money, get the bonus, etc., etc. Because that's his, the overall idea of freedom. So freedom is not such a simple concept to understand, which is why it's been so misunderstood for thousands of years. And therefore, the Korban Pesach, each aspect of it is a detail that if you understand it, you go into it, you figure out what it means and what it represents, then you can add another component to your journey to freedom. And if we had more time, and I did the research, we could spend more time on each of those details to understand them. I urge you to look at these details, explain them, and it's worthwhile, and give it some thought. Give it some thought. Sit down and think about what it might mean to you, and put the pictures together. And you'll see you'll gain a tremendous amount from it. But one detail that is in this week's parsha, not part of the Korban Pesach, it's kind of like seemingly incidental, but it's hugely important. I mean, hugely important that so few people pay attention to, but ought to, because it has so much to say about our history and what's going on today in general, and every generation for that matter, and what our obligation is in terms of participating in Tikkun Olam, rectification of the world. What detail is that? So, after the Jewish people, after the Makas Bechoros, the plague of the firstborn, were done. All the 10 plagues, just like God predicted, told Moshe back in Parshas Shmos that Pharaoh will not let the Jewish people go until they get to the 10th plague, the plague of the firstborn. And now we finally got there. We had all the other 9 Makas Bechoros take place. Pharaoh goes looking for Moshe and Aaron in the middle of the night, unlike most kings. And go, just go, just take your stuff, like you said, and go. And they're on their way out. And we've done Korban Pesach that night and everything. And now the Jewish people are finally walking out that door, literally walking out that door. And as they leave, Torah happens to mention along the way, and Moshe took the Erev Rav along with him, commonly translated as the mixed multitude. Rashi explains why it's a mixed multitude, because it wasn't just Egyptians, other people joined as well. But overall, it was Egyptians, and he took them with the Jewish people. We don't know why. It doesn't say why at that point, and no one questions it. But we know that that's a problem, because when it comes to Mount Sinai, 50 days later, and Moshe is perceived to have been delayed somewhat coming back down the mountain, so then the Erev Rav takes advantage of the opportunity. Now, it's important to point out that not everyone understands the Erev the same way. According to the Orach HaMakadosh, he explains the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, to be spies. That Pharaoh was worried that once the Jewish people tasted freedom, even for 3 days, because in the beginning, Pharaoh thought they were coming back. He didn't say go for good. He said go for the 3 days you asked for, and then come back. That's what he was expecting. But maybe it was a ruse. After all, he was playing games with them the entire time, so maybe now they're going to play a game on him. So therefore, he sent the Erev Rav amongst them to try to act like spies and create dissension and all that to try to get them back. And they do exactly that. Let's go back to Mitzrayim. Let's go back to Egypt. So that's according to the Archaim. But at Mount, when they finally build a golden calf, so God refers to Moshe's on the mountain receiving Torah, and then the Erev does their thing down below, right at the end, right just before he's going to come back. And we talk about divine providence, and God says to Moshe, your people are, causing a balagan, a real problem down there. Go down, because you're only up here because of them. And if they're not behaving properly, you don't belong up here either. So let's go back down. Rashi explains why is it referred to them as your people. We all think it's talking about the Jewish people in general. But as the Rashi points out, the word ha'am, the people, usually is a reference to the Erev. So God was saying to Moshe, your people, the Erev, you took out. Oh, what do you mean you took out? God didn't agree with this? No. According to tradition, according to the Medrash, that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to take the Erev along, and God said, not a good idea. You should leave them here. And Moshe said, but if we bring them to Mount Sinai to experience the giving of Torah, after we convert them, of course, make them full-fledged Jews, whatever, and they'll change, and they'll become part of the Jewish people, and we'll all be happy. Everyone will be fine. So God says, that's your decision, but I'm telling you right now, I'm not really in agreement with that. So why did Moshe do it anyhow? If God doesn't seem to be happy about the situation, why should Moshe be okay with the situation? It's a long story. It's a long story that goes back all the way to Adam HaRishon and the Chet of the Eitzadas Torah, and even before that. It goes back to even pre-creation. And it's a current, it's an undercurrent, it's a thread that runs through history until this very day. And the amazing thing is that until you actually learn Kabbalah, if you learn Kabbalah, you don't even see much about this, and you're certainly not aware of it. So how could you possibly be involved in the process of rectification? It's like, if it's so important, tell us about it. We should know about it, shouldn't we? Well, we would have. If we had continued on with Torah and not caused the temple to be destroyed and lost prophecy, we would be perfectly aware of all this, and we would know what to do. But we didn't. We didn't keep Torah. We didn't keep the things we're supposed to keep. As a result of that, the Jewish people were exiled. We have what's called Yeridus Adoiris, the going down of the generations. Generation after generation gets less spiritual, until you get to today, which is not nearly what it once was like. And so we lost connection to a lot of these deeper ideas and these deeper concepts. And one of the reasons why is because we're no longer capable on our spiritual level of actually doing the amount of rectification necessary. So therefore, the basic idea is that creation is going to be rectified anyhow. That's a given. That's not going to be stopped because of us. The only issue that we have to deal with is, will it happen because of us? Happen through us. Because of us means that we actively participate in the process, which takes the knowledge to know what it is, what has to be done. And through us means that we just go about our lives and go through history, whatever we're doing, basically. And whatever happens to us and whatever we do, whatever we accomplish, a person gets up in the morning, he goes to shul, he puts on his tefillin, right? He davens shachris, comes home, eats breakfast, goes to work, comes home, whatever he does, day after day. Then they make Shabbos and Yantiv and the cycle, and he's not thinking about much more than this is what I have to do. This is what a Jew does. A Torah Jew has to keep these things. He's not thinking tikkun. He's not even thinking about tikkun on a personal level necessarily. But it's happening anyhow. But then he stubs his toe at the door, or worse, he loses money in the stock market, or God forbid a person gets sick, or God forbid we have a pogrom, and then it gets bigger, and you even have a Holocaust, and all these events of Jewish history are just for tikkun, all for tikkun. And that's what happens. That's what it means to have the rectification take place through us, as opposed to because of us. So when we go, we daven and we say Tehillim and we pray to Hashem and we pour our hearts out. We're supposed to fast. In the old days, we put on sackcloth and ashes and sat in the streets and we daven to Kosh Baruch Hu. And we literally, cried from our hearts, and all that was to try to bring about the tikkun, or our learning too, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, chasadim, acts of chesed. Right? These are all things where we try to bring about the rectification because of us. But if it's not enough, then it happens through us, meaning unwittingly, unconsciously, and we just have to go through whatever we have to go through. The amount of suffering that the Jewish people have gone through, according to the Gemara, and we didn't know what it was all about, but the fact that we went through it, the Gemara says it's already enough that should be a merit for the final redemption with no more suffering. And that was talking about, back around 500, 499 CE when the Gemara was written down, and we're already in 2021. It's like 1,500 years later. We've had many pogroms since then, many crusades. We've had the Holocaust, and who knows, God forbid, what's coming up next in the world, because that's Jewish history. It's all about tikkun. But, right, we have this thing called the Erev Rav. Now, where'd they come from? So, the Arizal, who is an authority in things like this, it's Kabbalah, and explains that, well, they go back a long way, but the main thing is that when they finally reincarnated into the generation of the Jewish people in Egypt, so some of the souls were already rectified after many, they came back. First of all, it's a generation of the flood. They got wiped away. A certain rectification took place at that point in time. They came back as a generation that built the Tower of Babel, and they got dispersed, some went to Stum, and they got destroyed, and that was rectification on some level as well. And they came back, the next time, maybe a few times in between, smaller stuff, individuals, but eventually what happens is they come back in Mitzrayim and Egypt, but they're not all rectified in the same level because there's different levels of damage to these souls. And what happens, according to the Arizal, everything I'm saying right now is all from the Arizal, Shar Psukim, Parsha Shmos, and maybe even Shar Gegulim as well. It's all there. You can look for yourself. And he explains that when the souls came back in Mitzrayim, the ones that were more rectified, they were close to complete rectification, they came back and were born to the Jewish people. These women having 6 kids at one time, these are the souls that are coming back. They've been rectified to some degree. They come back as a Jewish people, but they have to go through the suffering because it's part of the completion of the rectification process. But some of the souls that were not rectified enough to come back within the Jewish people instead came back as Egyptians, but with an affinity for the Jewish people, for Bnei Yaakov. So all of a sudden, there were a bunch of Egyptians, a large amount of Egyptians, in fact, who began to gravitate towards the Jewish community, Goshen, wherever they were, and find that they related more to what they were doing than what their Egyptian brothers were doing in the end. And they formed their own community on the outskirts, so to speak, just because they felt they wanted to be close to Bnei Yaakov. And at that, by the time the Jewish people were ready to leave, or let's say by the 8th plague, I'll tell you why in a second I'm saying that. By the 8th plague, there were 6 million Erev Rav, according to the Arizal, and there were 15 million Jews. That's, large number, 15 million to 6 million. And then came Makas Choshech. Then came the plague of darkness. And the plague of darkness basically wiped away 4/5 of the Jewish population. None of the Erev Rav, but 4/5 of the Jewish population. All of a sudden, they went from 15 million to 3 million. So by the time that Moshe Rabbeinu left Mitzrayim with his entourage, there were 3 million Jews and twice the amount of Erev Rav. A massive amount of Erev Rav. That's very intimidating and quite overwhelming, to say the least. But this is where the Erev Rav came from. And the Arizal points out, it's interesting because if you look at the Parsha in Parsha Shmos, when, I won't go through the whole story, but how Pharaoh changed his mind about Yosef and all that, but when Pharaoh finally decides he's on the same page as his nobles about dealing with the Jewish people, he says we have to deal wisely with Ha'am and set taskmasters over the Jewish people. Now, you can read it that's the wisdom. Let's be wise and set taskmasters, but there's not a lot of wisdom in that. So the Medrash explains because it didn't happen overnight. They had a whole program. You can't just spring slavery into a nation without rebellion. So instead, he announced, let's all build together Pithom and Ramses, and even the Egyptians came out. They all got paid salaries and the whole thing like that. And they're all happy. And then one day, the Egyptians stopped showing up to work, and the Jews are the ones only showing up, but they're still getting paid. So more work, but more money, right? And then one day the money stops. And once the money stops, well, I'm not working anymore. But by that point, they were taskmasters. So you could say that was the wisdom. That's what Pharaoh did. He enticed the Jews, got them involved, got them in the mode of working, and then when he felt safe, he took away all the, all the niceties and all that. They became enslaved. He did it gradually, and that was the wisdom. The Rizal says no. It's not talking about that. I mean, that's not untrue, but that's not what the verse is talking about. He says instead, when Pharaoh says, "Let's deal wisely im ha'am," as we said before, ha'am usually refers to the Erev Rav. He means, let's deal wisely with that large group of Egyptians who, for some reason, have gravitated towards, the Bnei Yaakov, Bnei Israel. But as far as the Jewish people are concerned, taskmasters. Because he said the Jews will have to deal with, and put them down. But the Erev Rav, if we are clever about this, they'll come back. I don't want to destroy them. They're Egyptians. I'd rather have them part of our nation. 6 million people. It's a lot of people, right? So instead, let's bring them back into the fold by acting very diplomatically. And they had a whole program to do that. Didn't work apparently, but because they did leave with Moshe Rabbeinu instead. So why did Moshe insist upon taking them up? Because he understood that these are all part of these souls that have to be rectified before Mashiach comes. Before history comes. It's not just a sideshow. It is the show. These souls have to be rectified. They're damaged souls that go back to Adam HaRishon, back at that time, and they need to be fixed up. And, the ones that are part of the Jewish people also, aren't completely fixed up, clearly, because we stumbled quite a few times in the Midbar too. But it's a work in progress, for sure, still to this very day. But at least these ones, now God says, let them stay here, let them die here, and they'll reincarnate, and they'll come back on a higher level. And then it'll be better for all of history. Moshe says, it takes too long. For people to die and reincarnate and come back again, takes too long. But I think if we take them to Mount Sinai, then when they see you talk to the Jewish people and receive Torah, and their whole, they'll be so impressed, it'll just blow them away, and they'll be happily part of the Jewish people and do mitzvahs. In the beginning, that's the way it was. In fact, the beginning, when they first left, they're pretty much, according to the Rizal, they're pretty much on the same page of the Jewish people. It's just that they didn't have it in them to stay with it. And they lost it for a variety of reasons. So that's where they came from. And they became part of us, a massive number of people. And they're always the ones causing the problems in the desert. The Jewish people have their weaknesses, and they might have questioned Moshe, but it was the Erev Rav that instigated most of the events that go wrong in the desert. And there weren't a lot. Of course, in 40 years, there weren't tons, but what there was enough serious ones to literally break the camel's back and cause the Jewish people to be excellent to this very day. But the Erev Rav is a major component. If Moshe Rabbeinu had not taken the Erev Rav out of Egypt, more than likely the Jewish people would have gone to Mount Sinai, received Torah, the first set of tablets, not the second set of tablets. We would never have built the golden calf. And then that would have been Yemos HaMashiach, the Messianic era right then and there at Mount Sinai. And then the Erev would have got fixed up anyhow. And the world would have been perfect, and we didn't need this class, and we wouldn't have all these wars and all the controversy and confusion. No, we'd all be living in the Messianic era, as God willing, we hope we'll do very soon as well. But it didn't work out that way. And there's a lot of behind that too that has to be understood. Also, Kabbalistic, but that's the overall general scenario. Now, they show up several times in the Chumash, and then they disappear. At least there's no mention of them. If you look through Tanakh, as far as I recall, there's not one book after the Chumash where the Erev Rav is mentioned. You don't see them mentioned anywhere. As if they disappeared. I mean, they intermarried with the Jewish people. It's amazing they didn't get destroyed. Even with Korach, by Korach, there was still Erev Rav left over. And, Das and Baviram, as bad as they weren't part of the Erev Rav. They were part of the Jewish people. They're called Rishar. They go down with Korach and Parshas Korach. But, as far as Tanakh is concerned, and writings after that, we don't find much of a mention of the Erev Rav until you get to the Zohar. The Zohar was written, it's the notes, it's the material that was given over by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai around the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, but it's based upon a tradition that he got from Rabbi Akiva, who got from the Gedolim before him, and all the way back to Moshe at Mount Sinai. Why is it such a secret? Well, it's not really a secret. It's there. It was part of the material, but everybody has to be dealt with on the level. It's kind of hard to be dealing with topics like this, if you're just still struggling with the concept of Torah mitzvahs and trying to survive the Roman onslaught and before that the Greek onslaught and this exile, that exile, a lot of questions have to be answered. But the reality is that it is part of a tradition. And as you research, in fact, you can just Google it. You can just look it up and find out for yourself. There's papers written in the name of the Vilna Gaon, who spoke about this extensively, but it's based pretty much on the Zohar. And by the time the Zohar is written, or written down at least, it's not really officially published until was it 1250, something like that, the 13th century, by Moshe de Leon, and then it becomes publicized, and there's a lot of controversy at first, but the Arizal came along and he went to the Zohar and he basically verified what's actual, fixed up what was mistaken, and pretty much the Zohar we have today, as much as many would like to attribute to other authors and sources and go with the controversy. Once the Arizal, he decided on this, he was the authority to do that. You can rely upon the Zohar, okay, and go with it. So the Zohar points out and says that actually there are, in fact, 5 categories of Erev Rav. By the time the Zohar is written, we only don't hear about the 5 categories back in the desert. Just one category, the Erev Rav, bad news guys. They're causing all these problems. But the Zohar itself talks about 5 different categories of Erev Rav, and their notricon, or their Rosh Tevis, or their acronym, the short version, we take out the first letter of each of the words and combine together to make a memory device, is Negara. Negara means like a bad plague, right? Ra is bad, and Nega is like a plague, or it's like a blemish or something like that. And it's a bad blemish, a bad plague. But it stands for, right? The Nun is Nephilim, Gimel is Giburim, then Ayin is Amalek, and then you have Resh is Rafim, and then it's Anakim. Actually, the first one thing is Anakim. I'm not sure. One of them is Anakim, one of them is Amalek. Doesn't make a difference. There's no need to have to worry about the order of which when they all. It's just a way to remember these 5 different categories. Now, some of them we recognize off the bat. Amalek is a nation that's mentioned right there in the Chumash, with the mitzvah coming up of Parshas Zachor to remember what Amalek did to the Jewish people on their way out of Mitzrayim. And they're the nemesis, the antithesis of the Jewish people. The only nation that God personally, Kaviocha, has declared war against. Yishmael, he doesn't. Asaph, he doesn't. There's all kinds of bad people in history that God has not declared war against, but Amalek, he declares war against specifically. And then you have Nephilim. They're spoken about at the end of Parshas Bereshis, fallen angels that came down to earth and became humans in the end. And there's giants, Rephaim, and Akim are giants also, right? And then you have Giborim, and Akim, Amalek, Rephaim. Well, that covers basically all 5 categories. Why these names? Because, as we know, that every nation represents a concept. A nation becomes the embodiment of a concept. More than like just the biblical nations. The nations today are either just offshoots or descendants of those nations somewhere, and they're all mixed together. But the biblical nations themselves became the embodiment of a concept. For example, Amalek is a good example. Where does Amalek come from? So we know that Amalek comes at the end of Parshas Bashalach. They attack the Jewish people. They are nomadic people living in the Negev of Eretz Canaan. They're not one of the 7 Canaanite nations that Jewish people will be commanded to destroy. But they go out of their way, cross the desert, down to Yam Suf, which is a long distance and expensive. You got to feed the animals, take care of the troops, and all that, just to attack the Jewish people. Now, they're considered to be, the race is good, the worst of all the anti-Semites, because until that time, anybody who did not like the Jewish people would not attack the Jewish people, because they knew that God just saved them, destroyed Egypt, and why bother, start up with God? Look at, Paro did that. Look what got him in the end. It's like a bully chasing a child across the school, courtyard, and the child's running for his life, and he thinks he's finished, and the bully's catching up, and he can't keep running. But thank God he sees the principal, right? The principal's walking across, checking on the, and he runs over to the principal for safety, and he literally stands next to the principal, and the bully walks up to him and still hits him right by the principal. And the principal's shocked. How could this guy not be afraid of the consequence? Well, that's already what Amalek is like. Even though he knows he's going to get burned in the process, he's going to have to pay the price for it, he still does it. He still attacks the Jewish people, and he cools them down. Changes history because of his attack. It's part of the preparation for receiving Torah at Mount Sinai, discussion to itself. But that's the concept of Amalek. Now, where'd they come from? Why all of a sudden they just show up on the scene? So Rashi explains, and Chazal explain, that it all began because the Jewish people asked a very simple question that had profound impact on history. They asked, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im ayin? Is Hashem amongst us or not? Is God amongst us or not? Why? Why they asked this question? They just saw the destruction of Egypt. They just crossed the sea miraculously. They just had bread fall from Shemayim. It tastes like almost anything you want, miraculously. How could they possibly ask that question? So it says they were short of water. They needed some water. The bear Miriam had not yet started up and was going to start very soon, but they were thirsty. So rather than say, "Hey Moshe, this is a great journey. We love what you've done with this whole trip and all that, and we anticipate wonderful things," but just a small question, the water situation. People kind of like, a little fetchy and thirsty. What should we do about the water situation? Oh, good. Okay, fine. So we'll solve that one. Let me show you what to do. They don't do that. They go ahead and is God amongst us or not? Come on, where's the water? It says because they asked this question, Amalek attacked. Because they asked this question and went to suffer for all the generations. I'm sorry. I take back the question. I take it back. He was like, no, you asked this question. Because that created Amalek. That doubt in divine providence, that doubt in Hashgacha Pratis, created the reality of Amalek. Well, the people were already living. Amalek was a nation that already existed. They came from Timnah and Eliphaz, as they points out in Parshas V'yishlach, right? And they were. So how did we created Amalek? No, because it's like clothing, right? The clothing's in the window, right? There's the clothing, but it's semantic. Get to a place with a human being. You buy the clothing, put the clothing on. Now the clothing has a person to dress. So Amalek was muchad. It was like built to be this type of an enemy. But what infused the enemy with that reality of attacking, even in spite of all the logic against it, that was the question the Jewish people asked. Because that doubt that they had in the reality of God when looking for a nation that could embody it. And that was Amalek. And then once Amalek received that negative energy, it was inspired to go attack the people who created that negative energy, all part of divine providence. And the rest of history. It's history. So you don't have to be born from Amalek to be Amaleki or to do Amaleki things. We are all capable of being Amalek at some point in time or doing an Amaleki thing. You only become an Amaleki person if your philosophy embodies this doubt in divine providence. If you live your life that way and you insist upon it and even push it on to others and argue the point, so that can make you Amaleki. That can make you an Erev Rav with the Amaleki tendency. And you gotta watch out. As my Rosh Hashanah used to always say, check it out. You gotta, before, you can't be an atheist because you can't prove that God doesn't exist. So you're an agnostic, fine, you have doubt. But there are many sources that say that doubt is unnecessary. Check it out, find out. You don't just go with it and say, well, I'm agnostic, and feel good about that. That could put you in the category of Erev Rav that is Amaleki, and you'll have to suffer the fate of that category. Nephilim, another category. Well, who are they? Well, we see it in the Chumash, but they're not here today. They died off a long time ago. But they embodied a specific character trait. And what was that? They loved promiscuity. That was their thing. That was their thing. So they pursued it That was their greatest pleasure, to be promiscuous. So somebody who's promiscuous, and that includes different categories of promiscuity. You don't have to be the worst thing of all. It just be anything that even suggests it. You have to be very careful about a lack of modesty. You have to be very careful about how you behave in public with other people. How much humility you have, how much what we call modesty, tznius. These are all the important categories. So before you start breaking the rules and bending the rules, you have to be careful, because that could put you in the category of the feeling. Right, and the Zohar goes on. The Vilna Gun also does the thing as well. I just want to look at see it more inside. Right, that's in the feeling. Right, the next category you have is a Giburi. Right, one of the 5 categories it says. Right, because it says the Fisher Hem Giborim Mordim B'Bekom. Why they call it Giborim means strong ones. Right, mighty strong ones. So why they call that? Because he says because they're very strong and they rebel against God. Their soul, he says, more than likely comes from the generation that built the Tower of Babel, which means, what are they after? Fame. They want, because it says, let's build this tower and make a name for ourselves. So back then, it was like, we're going to control the world through our accomplishments and challenge God, right? That's what the Tower of Babel represented. A new world order. That's what they call it. It was a new world order, right? So anybody who goes around lording themselves over others and tries to use their influence and their power to manipulate things to their liking, to their benefit, not for the sake of God, not for the sake of Torah, can fall into the category of Erev Rav, who's called Giborim. And again, we'll have to suffer the fate of the Erev Rav, because that's going to come up towards the end of days. Right. The next category he talks about is the Rephaim, right? And he says that's the 4th category. And what are they called, Rephaim? Let me just find. So he says, Imroim es Yisrael, but the Tzarus, right? Let's say they see the Jewish people suffering and they need money or help, whatever, some type of salvation, they see it. They see, and they're in a position. If you're not in a position to help, obviously God doesn't expect that from you. You have to still feel and care. Just because you can't change a person's situation to make it better doesn't mean you cannot feel that their pain. There's a separate mitzvah called Nozo Obechavero, to carry the burden of your brother, which means that even you can't really get in there and help the person change their situation, but you have to still feel their pain, the burden of their pain. That alone, misery loves comfort. It's like, it's a, the whole point is that you have to let them know that you care about the situation. That itself helps them. But we're talking about people who are in a position to help. They have the resources. They have the funds. On principle, they don't want to do it. Not the right principle, their own principle. Just doesn't sit right with them. They don't feel comfortable because somehow it goes against their way of thinking, which is not in line with the Torah's way of thinking. They don't understand how God has put this person or this group of people in their path so they can help them out. And when someone turns their back on the Jewish people who's in a position to help out, that puts them in the category, says the Zohar, of the Rephaim. And it's getting late, but this one last category. But the Anakim is the 5th one. He says, this category, he says, and explains why. I'm just very briefly. Again, you can look up online and see it for yourself. But he says this category specifically, what they do is they make fun of Torah leaders and people learning Torah. They don't have any respect. They could be religious. They might even learn Torah themselves. But when it comes to showing the proper respect to those who lead the Torah world and those who learn Torah, they don't. And they even go so far as to disgrace them in one way or another, either to their face, behind their back. It doesn't make a difference. They don't. It's clear they don't have this respect. And a person may think, well, teach his own. They're doing their thing. I don't like what they're doing. I feel people should do that. They should do that. That's my. We're all religious, but but a person does. You have to be very careful, because you could find yourself in the category of the Erev Rav called Anakim. So the Vilna Gaon says that the final battle of history, he says, is against the Erev Rav. Forget about the Arabs. Forget about Ishmael. Forget about all the other. The battle is going to be against the Erev Rav, he says. That's the final battle for the Jewish people, and it's going to be the worst battle of all. Of all of them. How can that be that such a small group of people compared to the rest of the world? Well, it's what they do and how they go about fighting that battle and how they manipulate and how few people, we're seeing it today, how few people, because they have money, because they have power, because they have influence, how they can manipulate the events to change the world for everybody else. And they're just a couple against billions, but boy, are they ever influential and impactful. And he says that if a person doesn't fight against that, then they're one of them. There's no neutrality. There's no neutral ground over here. So anybody, this is Vilna Gaon speaking, anybody who does not fight this battle against the Erev Rav is considered to be part of the Erev Rav, even if you don't fit in these other categories, he says. And he says, better you weren't born at all. So that whoa, it's like, that's heavy. I'm going, in 45 minutes from not even knowing they existed or that they're an issue to finding out that that's my main battle in life. And how do they work, he says? Achizas Anayim. Deception. That's their main thing. Their main. Everybody else can use the missiles and the money, and they don't need that. They use deception. They are the ones who make it seem as if they're on your side, they're on your team, they're out for your good, but really they're not. That's the Erev Rav. That's one of the main qualities of the Erev Rav. They might even think it on some level, but it's clear from what they want and where they're going that this is not for the good of mankind. It's not for the good of Jewish people, and certainly not sanctioned by Torah. That's an Erev Rav thing. So, one verse in this week's Parshas Bo, that Moshe took the Erev Rav. The Zohar says because he did this thing, he's to come back in every generation. He's to reincarnate in every generation in some person form, just to work and fix up the Erev Rav that he took out to make amends for that decision back at the beginning. But it's important to know, where that leads a person from this point on. I don't know, but at least you have to be aware of what the backdrop of history, especially today, especially so close to the end. Because if we are as close to the end as we say we are, then we're in that battle, and it would seem clearly that we are. So at least be aware of the stranger amongst us, so they don't get duped and pulled in and make that mistake. You can fight at different levels. Just ultimately speaking, just to finish off, it's brought down in Kabbalah that the gematria of the word Erev Rav, the letters add up to a number, actually is 474, which is the gematria of the word das. Das is the word, it could just mean knowledge, das, but das is the key word for a specific type of knowledge, godly knowledge, the truth, and clarity. It's a very holy, important word and thing that we have to strive for. We learn Torah to achieve das like this. So how could the Erev Rav equal the same thing? So the answer is, just go back to the beginning. We know it was an Eitz Das Tov V'Ra. It was a tree of knowledge of good and evil. You can have Das Tov and you can have Das Ra. The Erev Rav represents Das Ra, that bad dust, the damaging dust, the dust that interferes in a person's relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God. The main battle is to get the positive dust, is to fill yourself up with the truth as much as possible. Don't get pulled into the world of falsehood, and make it part of you. Become real with it. You do that, you're fighting the battle on the right side of the line. We should be merit to fight that battle, to win that battle, and find ourselves on the right side of the line. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much. Another amazing webinar. I have two questions, because very enlightening. My first question is, you've implied, I'm just trying to clarify, that souls are not born as Erev Rav, but they choose whether to be part of the Erev Rav. Meaning, if you do X, you'll become the Erev Rav, and if you don't do X, if you're more modest, you won't, and if you're less modest, you will. If you're, is that correct?
To some degree, yes, but I'd say the other way is more likely. That we're talking about souls that are reincarnating, which means that certain souls have a propensity more than others to capitulate to that way of life. The Erev Rav can do tshuva. they can actually straighten themselves out. So what I'm trying to say, basically, I guess it wasn't clear enough, is that we don't know really who we are, right? But you see, we all have tendencies. So I'm saying that, check out those tendencies. If your tendencies tend to fall in line with the Torah, you're okay, and stick with it. But if you find yourself having any of these reactions to these things we just spoke about, and you associate yourself as being, well, I'm just like another part of the Jewish people, but I feel this, well, check it out, because you want to be careful, because a person can be seduced to the dark side, as the expression goes, right? And you have to check it out, because they are alive and well. We see there are people in the world today who clearly would seem to fit in the category. Just as a caveat, since you made this point, there's a difference between not being religious because you don't know better, and no one's taught you, and you don't have the opportunity, and being part of the Erev Rav. Many people today who might, are just misguided. That's a problem too. That has to be dealt with. The Erev Rav specifically goes to war against the Jewish people and truth. Literally, that's one of the main, things. If you find yourself in that category, you have to think about it and look at yourself and say, am I on the right path? And maybe I should check this out, and before I get pulled too far in, because a person can actually enter quite innocently and end up getting pulled into it. But God gave us a brain, and our obligation is to use that to get to the truth. But more than likely, Erev Rav, that it becomes real, ardent, hardcore Erev Rav, probably were souls that reincarnated from, we spoke about back in Egypt and through history, and have a propensity. So you have to watch out for them.
So that leads perfectly to my second question, which is that you seem to be saying that there's only a few against many, that there's a few people that are in the Erev Rav against the majority of us, when it seems to me to be the exact opposite. If all the conditions you just mentioned involve something to do with the Erev Rav, including someone who's not actively fighting against the Erev Rav, then it sounds to me like the majority would be part of the Erev Rav, not the minority.
It's a question. I can't quantify it. I have no idea what it's like today. But for example, when you read these categories, he goes into more detail. For example, like just one small example, right? Somebody who builds a shul or donates a Sefer Torah. This is his language, okay? Not because they want to further the cause of Judaism, they want the publicity. They want to become, a popular person. They want to become, seen as as I say, a Baal Tzedakah, someone who gives, tzedakah, and it has nothing to do with the good, for the good of the people. It's only because this is what people, the world I live in. People put people like this on a pedestal. I want to be up there. I want to be famous. I want to be someone who's known. For that reason alone, a person can fall in the category of Erev Rav. So
I would say that includes me and most other people that I know that have kavod and taiva and gaiva. These are the things that we're all striving to work on ourselves.
Exactly. When I read that, I went, whoa. I sat back and I said, it's like, could I be? But the very fact that you asked that question and you worry about it means that you're going to work on not doing that, and that could exclude you from the Erev Rav. But there's still a lot of people out there who don't know better and maybe don't even know themselves that well. Yeah. It could be that there's a lot of people who are part of the Erev Rav on some level or another. I don't know. I can't tell you. And you have to be careful before you go calling some. That's why I make a distinction between those who are just simply secular, don't know but are misguided, and the Erev Rav. But nevertheless,
within the religious community, within the Orthodox Jewish community, I think that most people that are making a significant donation and they're not doing it totally anonymously, they're putting their name on it. So they're definitely thinking in the back of their minds subconsciously that.
But not only. Listen, everybody, you can't help but have taiva, gaiva. When I eat on Shabbos, I'm supposed to eat for L'Chavot Shabbos Kodesh. Now I say the word L'Chavot Shabbos Kodesh, but come on, between you and me and God, I like what I'm eating. I chose this for supper tonight because this is what I like. But I'm aware that there's a mixture, and I'm aware of what I'm supposed to be striving to achieve. So I work at myself. That's what you have to do. Work on yourself. That's the main thing. We all have these tendencies, 100%. But the difference between somebody who's really Erev Rav is not Erev Rav is somebody who recognizes that within themselves they have these tendencies, but they know it's not right, and they really should get rid of it. I have a tough time doing that, but at least I admit that I have to work on this thing. You're not Erev Rav. But then you actually allow yourself to enjoy that, and you go with that, and you find it's perfectly okay to be like that, that you have to worry about.
So, I mean, we can go on forever, and I'd love to go on. All I can say is that it sounds to me like everyone's part of the Erev in some way or another, and that we all have to start working on ourselves. And it sounds even more so. I would conclude from what you've said that the final war is actually internal, not external, because we're all fighting ourselves. But anyways, again, another excellent webinar.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you so much, and Shabbat Shalom.